Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's first ever virtual compliance assistance conference. My name is Dan Sowery with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I will be moderating this afternoon's Spill Prevention Controls and Countermeasures presentation with US EPA Region 5's Kim Churchill and Heather McNerney. We also have Mark Howard from US EPA headquarters with us, and he'll be helping to address the questions at the end. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few items to help you participate and engage with our presenters during this afternoon session. On this slide here, you will see a screenshot of an example of an attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop on the upper right-hand corner. For this webinar, you are listening and using your computer audio. If you're having sound issues, click on the microphone button to switch your audio settings. If that doesn't work, try refreshing your browser. And if that doesn't work, try logging out and logging back in. Please feel free to submit your questions to the presenters by typing them into the questions pane on your control panel. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will address them during the Q&A portion at the end of this session. If we do not answer your question during the Q&A portion, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and a follow-up email along with the session survey. The session survey will also appear once this webinar ends. We value your feedback, and we greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing and to let us know if there's anything that we can do to further assist you. A certificate of attendance will also be included via email about a day or so after the session. This session has been approved for 1 hour registered sanitarian and sanitarian in training credit and 1 BMP hour for C&D certified operators. If you did not submit your professional certification number in the CEU ID number box when registering, please make sure to do so, or please make sure to provide us with your number through the Q&A feature. Attendees seeking American Planning Association credit may do so through APA's self-reporting option. Log into your My APA account and select the self-reported credits option to receive credit. And if you're seeking other CEUs, please refer to our conference agenda available as a handout to this presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to US EPA Region 5's Kim Churchill.
Thanks, Dan. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to talk about spill prevention, control, and countermeasures. I am Kim Churchill, and I have with me virtually Heather McNerney to present this brief overview for you of 40 CFR Part 112. Oh, I don't seem to have control of the slides. Can we move to the first slide?
I apologize for that, Kim. I think we lost our advancer of slides.
Oh, so, no.
Mike Kelly, if you're there, if you could advance the slides, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Kim's got control. It was on pause.
All right. Thank you. Let's see if we can change this now. Oh, too far. Back up. Okay. We're starting off real good here. So I just want to give first and foremost this wonderful legal disclaimer to everyone. You know, anything Heather and I say can't and shouldn't be used against us if we mistakenly say anything that goes against any rules, regulations, statutes, or guidance during the presentation. You know, in the event the presentation, the slides, or anything that we say goes against, it's not controlling. To continue, the presentation also doesn't impose any legally binding requirements on EPA or the regulated community. Examples are provided as suggestions, and the word should is not intended to be controlling either. We do retain direction to adopt approaches on a case-by-case basis that differ from portions of this presentation when appropriate. And then references and links provided are subject to change, but they are current as of today. Oh, having problems. There we go. Okay. So in the brief amount of time that we have today, we're going to try to cram a lot into this session. We're going to start with an introduction to why we have the SPCC rule and who the rule applies to. We'll go over subpart A, which are general requirements for all SPCC plans. And then subparts B and C, which have additional requirements based on the activities a facility engages in and the type of oil they handle. And then we'll close out with regional context and guidance for SPCC. I want to stress that this presentation is not going to be able to cover every SPCC provision. It is laid out to follow the sequence of the rule and to cover as many of the provisions as possible. But due to the limited time, the entire rule is not going to be covered, and even provisions that we do cover or touch on may not be covered in full. Also keep in mind that there's several performance-based provisions of the rule, so examples provided may not address all facility scenarios or be a one-size-fits-all approach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather, where she's going to cover where the regulation comes from and who needs to follow it.
Thanks, Kim. Hey, everybody. Let's first go over where the SPCC requirements come from. They are part of the Code of Federal Regulations, and Title 40 is specific to EPA for protection of the environment. Part 112 covers oil pollution prevention and includes the federal requirements to prevent oil discharges from reaching navigable waters. And these include containment, control measures, and countermeasures. Part 110 covers similar requirements specific to discharges of oil. And this is also called the Sheen Rule. This part is what documents the prohibition of oil discharges, includes discharge reporting requirements, and establishes what is considered a discharge in a quantity that may be harmful. Now, overall, these requirements are set via authority under the Clean Water Act. Okay, cool. So I'm sure you're wondering, is my facility subject to the SPCC rule? So requirements under 40 CFR Part 112 apply to facilities based on four main criteria. These are the type of facility, the type of activities that the facility is engaged in that involve oil, if the facility has reasonable expectation of a discharge, and the facility's storage capacity versus the SPCC thresholds. Additional requirements may apply for those facilities as well that meet certain substantial harm criteria. All right, so first part of applicability is facility type. We look at facility type based on three categories, which are non-transportation related facilities, transportation related facilities, and complexes. So let's discuss each in a little more detail. Non-transportation related facilities are those at which EPA has jurisdiction, and these are going to include the fixed or mobile onshore and offshore drilling and production facilities, oil refining facilities and oil storage facilities, various types of facilities that store and use oil on site, waste or used oil treatment facilities, facilities that have equipment used to transfer oil in bulk to or from highway vehicles such as tank trucks or railroad cars, as well as transportation of oil by highway vehicles, railroad cars, and pipelines within the confines of a non-transportation related facility. Transportation related facilities are those that are going to have jurisdiction by either the Department of Transportation and PHMSA through them, or the Coast Guard. Examples include terminal facilities with equipment to transfer oil in bulk to or from a vessel, including the reception and storage of any oily ballast water. Also includes the equipment at a non-transportation related facility that is specifically used to transfer oil in bulk to or from a vessel. This would also include any pipeline systems, highway vehicles such as tank trucks and railroad cars that are used for transporting oil, and equipment used to fuel locomotive units. Now, complexes are going to be a combination of these, and a facility that has both transportation and non-transportation related components will be considered a complex. And based on the type of activities being conducted there, the facility would then be subject to jurisdiction by more than one federal agency. The next part of applicability we're going to look at is the oil activity. So applicable activities are drilling, producing, gathering, storing, refining, transferring, distributing, using, or consuming oil and oil products. And when we're considering what is an oil for these activities, the rule defines oil to include oil of any kind or any form, such as petroleum, sludge, synthetic oil, mineral oil, animal fats and related products, and vegetable oils. The next key for applicability is the reasonable expectation, and this is covered in 112.1b of the rule. You want to look at if the facility can be reasonably expected to discharge oil in quantities that may be harmful into or upon navigable waters. And if you have any questions or want some additional information on navigable waters, these can be found at epa.gov/NWPR. So as defined in the SPCC rule, a discharge is going to include any spilling, leaking, pumping, pouring, emitting, emptying, or dumping of oil, regardless of where it occurs. Now, there are some exemptions, though, such as discharges associated with Section 402 of the Clean Water Act and Section 13 of the River and Harbor Act. So as I said, a facility has to be reasonably expected to discharge oil in quantities that may be harmful. And in this term, we refer back to the Sheen rule, so 40 CFR Part 110. May be harmful is considered as for discharges that violate water quality standards, cause a film sheen or discoloration on the water surface, cause a sludge or emulsion beneath the water surface, and there could be others as well. And these include discharges that are not only harmful to public health and welfare, but also the environment. So the owner or operator is going to make the determination of whether or not the facility has reasonable expectation of a discharge. When making this determination, though, it must be based only on aspects related to the geography and location of the facility. So any man-made structures like dikes and other equipment and features at the facility that would otherwise prevent a discharge or restrain it cannot be considered as part of that determination. Really important. However, the owner or operator may consider with this determination any past discharges of oil, if the facility is adjacent to a navigable water, any on-site conduits that could connect to a navigable water, like storm sewers and groundwater, any unique geological or geographic features at the facility, such as maybe the depth of groundwater or natural sloping, if the facility is near a waterway and any natural drainage, if precipitation could transport oil off-site, as well as the quantity and nature of oil stored at the facility. Now, the last part of SPCC applicability is the threshold, and this is going to be the facility's total oil storage capacity versus the SPCC threshold. SPCC requirements are going to apply to those facilities with greater than 1,320 gallons of above-ground storage or 42,000 gallons of completely buried or underground storage. And in order to determine that total oil storage capacity, the facility needs to count all oil storage containers with capacities of 55 gallons or greater, and these would include oil-filled equipment. However, there are some exemptions that we're going to go over where certain containers would not need to be included as part of this calculation. Now, when we look at storage capacity, we're referring to the shell capacity of the container based on this design. It's not going to be the operational amount of oil that a facility actually stores in the container. This is really important. And if a new container is brought on site and has never stored oil, it does not need to be included as part of that total oil storage capacity until it is brought into service. There are exemptions for permanently closed containers as well, but the container needs to meet the definition of permanently closed under the rule. And this means that all liquid and sludge have been removed from each container and connecting line, and all connecting lines have been disconnected and blanked, all valves closed and locked, and signage, conspicuous signage, is posted on the container stating that it is permanently closed, not out of service, permanently closed, and the date of closure. So overall, when determining what to count and what not to count when you're making this calculation, as we discussed, you do want to count those containers with capacities, individual capacities of 55 gallons or greater. But you do not need to count containers that are permanently closed, like we discussed, as well as motive power containers, hot mix asphalt containers, single family residential heating oil containers, any containers used for pesticide application and mixing, containers that store milk or milk products, completely buried tanks that are subject to all of the technical requirements of EPA's UST program that's covered in 40 CFR Part 280, or a separate state program that's going to be approved by EPA under 40 CFR Part 281, USTs that supply emergency diesel generators at nuclear power stations, and any containers that are used exclusively for wastewater treatment. In addition to SPCC applicability, a facility is also going to be subject to facility response plan requirements under the rule if they meet certain substantial harm criteria. And these are going to be based on storage capacity and level of harm. So according to the rule, a facility may pose substantial harm if it has 42,000 gallons or greater of total oil storage capacity and transfers oil over water, or it has greater than or equal to 1 million gallons of total oil storage capacity and meets at least one of the following conditions. So greater than or equal to 1 million and lacks sufficient secondary containment within any above ground storage area, greater than or equal to 1 million and located at a distance where a discharge from the facility could cause injury to fish, wildlife, or sensitive environments, greater than or equal to 1 million and located at a distance where a discharge from the facility would shut down a public drinking water intake, or greater than or equal to 1 million and the facility has had a reportable discharge greater than or equal to 10,000 gallons within the last 5 years. So facilities that meet this criteria would then need to prepare an FRP in addition to an SPCC plan. The FRP is going to have additional requirements and must be submitted to EPA for review and approval. And overall, all facilities must complete the certification of substantial harm found in the regulation and maintain this at the facility, regardless if they are FRP subject or not. This is going to be what documents that the facility has evaluated whether or not they meet that substantial harm criteria. And with that, brings us to our live polling question number 1. So we just talked about applicability. When determining SPCC applicability, which factors should not be considered when determining the reasonable expectation of an oil discharge from a facility in harmful quantities? Is it precipitation runoff, sewer systems, secondary containment or other man-made structures, overland flow path, or whether a past discharge of oil reached a navigable water? So we'll give you some time to get your answers in.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And we have launched the polls. Once this shows up on your screen, go ahead and make your selection. And we'll give folks approximately another 45 seconds to make their selections. Okay, most folks have made their selections. We'll give it a few more seconds. The votes are slowly coming in, so I think folks are really thinking about this one. So we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Okay, looks like most of you guys were paying attention. The correct answer is going to be secondary containment or other man-made structures. So remember, when determining the reasonable expectation, you want to take into account any conduits. So sewer systems you would take into account. I see some people put sewer systems as the answer, but you do not want to take into account any secondary containment or other man-made structures that would otherwise hinder or restrain a discharge. So moving on. So to cover part 2, I am going to turn it back over to Kim.
All right, thanks, Heather. I'm going to cover subpart A of the regulation now. This applies to all facilities that are subject to the rule. And again, we're going to follow the sequence of the rule here for subpart A. So if you are required to be a facility that needs an SPCC plan, you need to prepare that plan in writing and in accordance with all applicable sections of the regulation. There are compliance dates for preparing, amending, and implementing a plan. And all facilities that are currently in operation should have a plan already prepared and fully implemented. Now, if you are a new facility, SPCC non-production facility, you have to prepare and implement a plan before you begin your operations. If you are a new production facility for SPCC, you must prepare and implement within 6 months of beginning operations. Now, unless your facility is a qualified facility, which I'll address shortly, a licensed professional engineer must review and certify the plan in order for it to effectively satisfy the requirements of Part 112. It's important to remember that a PE certification, though, will not relieve the owner or the operator of their duty to prepare and implement the plan. Now, we get a lot of questions about PE certification, so I want to cover a couple. First, for federal compliance, a PE does not need to be licensed in the same state as the facility is located. However, some state licensing board may not allow it, so make sure you have a PE aware of what their state licensing boards allow. Another question we get is whether or not PEs can be employees of the facility for SPCC certification, and they can be. Now, the regulation also requires that a complete copy of the plan be kept at the facility if it's normally attended at least 4 hours a day. If not, then a copy must be kept at the nearest field office. The regulation does not require that SPCC plans be submitted to EPA for review or approval. Only FRP has that requirement. However, it does require that the plan be made available to EPA for review during normal business hours. Keep in mind, though, that there are other provisions that allow EPA to require a submittal under other circumstances. The regulation requires reporting to EPA if there's been a discharge of more than 1,000 gallons of oil in a single discharge to navigable waters or adjoining shorelines, or more than 42 gallons of oil or greater in each of 2 discharges to navigable water or adjoining shorelines within a 12-month period. If you meet either of these, the owner or operator must report this to EPA. Now, remember, when you're determining that quantity discharge, it's the total amount that reaches the water or adjoining shoreline. So if 1,000 gallons is discharged from a container, but only 900 gallons reaches the navigable water or adjoining shoreline, the discharge does not need to be reported under 112.4. However, that would need to be called into the National Response Center, because any oil discharge that violates 40 CFR Part 110, that Sheen rule, requires notification. Now, if there's a change at the facility that could affect the potential for discharge, like commissioning or decommissioning containers, replacing, reconstructing, or moving containers or piping, or if you have construction or demolition that might alter secondary containment structures, have a change in product or services, or if you revise your operating or maintenance procedures, you must amend your plan. Now, these types of changes require what is known as a technical amendment to the plan, which must be prepared within 6 months and implemented as soon as possible, but no later than 6 months following the preparation of the amendment. And technical amendments require that a licensed PE review and certify those technical amendments in that plan amendment. You also are required to complete a review and evaluation of the SPCC plan at least once every 5 years. You must document the completion in writing and sign a statement as to whether you will amend the plan as a result of the review and evaluation. So you might be asking what would require an amendment after you do a review. If more effective prevention and control technology is available that will significantly reduce the likelihood of a discharge, you must amend your plan within 6 months to include the new technology and implement the amendments no later than 6 months following the preparation of those amendments. Now, keep in mind that technical amendments will require PE certification. However, amendments that are non-technical or administrative in nature, such as updating contact numbers or updating the facility diagram, do not require PE certification. As a general rule of thumb, if the amendment requires the application of good engineering practice, it will require PE certification. If the owner or operator is not sure whether a change is technical or non-technical, you should have it certified. Now, smaller oil storage facilities may be eligible for streamlined requirements if they meet eligibility requirements. If you're a facility that has 10,000 gallons or less of total above ground storage capacity, and you have had no single discharge exceeding 1,000 gallons or no 2 discharges exceeding 42 gallons in any 12-month period in the last 3 years, then you can qualify as a Tier 2 facility and you can choose to self-certify a full SPCC plan. So if you meet Tier 2 qualifications, you do not need a PE to certify your plan. However, keep in mind also, some states may prohibit self-certification of plans. But if you're choosing to deviate from any allowed measures by including environmentally equivalent measures, which we'll talk about in a little bit, a PE must certify those alternative measures. Now, if you're a facility that meets those qualifications for Tier 2, but you also have no individual above ground storage tank with a capacity greater than 5,000 gallons, you could qualify as a Tier 1 facility and have streamlined requirements for integrity testing and security, and you have the option to complete and implement a self-certified SPCC plan template that's been prepared by EPA in lieu of a full SPCC plan. Now, it's important to note that this plan template that EPA developed is optional. Tier 1 facilities do not need to use this template. You can make your own template, create your own plan, and Tier 2 facilities can't use the template. Regardless of whether you're a qualified facility that doesn't need a PE certification or a full facility, all plans must be prepared in accordance with good engineering practices. The plan must have the full approval of management at a level of authority to commit necessary resources to implement the plan. If your plan does not follow the sequence of the rule, it must be an equivalent plan that meets all applicable requirements, and it must include a cross-section referencing the locations of the requirements in that equivalent plan. If additional facilities, methods, or equipment are not yet fully operational, the plan must explain the details of installation and startup. And this is what I mentioned earlier about environmental equivalence. Under 112.7A2, it allows for you to deviate from some technical requirements if you provide equivalent environmental protection by alternative measures. However, you cannot deviate from any of the secondary containment requirements We'll talk about more about secondary containment shortly. In your plan, you need to describe the physical layout of the facility and include a facility diagram. On that facility diagram, you're going to need to mark the location and contents of each fixed oil storage container and any storage area where mobile or portable containers are located. Even if you have exempt underground tanks and pipelines at your facility, they still must be identified and marked on your diagram. And you need to provide enough details so that those reviewing the plan know how to undertake prevention activities, perform inspections, and take response measures. The plan needs to include the type of oil that you have in each container and the storage capacity of each container. And the routine handling of oil products must be discussed and described, along with discharge prevention measures and discharge and drainage controls. In addition to describing how to prevent and control a discharge, you must address the countermeasures in place for discharge discovery, response, and cleanup. The plan also needs to address how you're going to dispose of those recovered materials, and you need to take into account state disposal laws. So make sure you're including discussions on that. You need to include in your plan contact information for your facility response coordinator, the National Response Center, cleanup contractors that you have an agreement for a response, and all appropriate federal, state, and local agencies who must be contacted in case of a discharge. If your facility is not also a FRP facility, you must provide information for reporting a discharge, and you must organize the portions of the plan describing the procedures for when a discharge occurs so that they're readily available during an emergency. Remember, you don't want to be fumbling through various pages or sections of the plan to get the information you need during a discharge or during an emergency. A major part of your plan is going to be the prediction of the direction, rate of flow, and total quantity of oil which could be discharged as a result of each type of major equipment failure. So you need to include predictions for things like your tank loading and unloading areas and equipment, tank overflows, ruptures or leakage, and any other equipment known to be a source of a discharge. You need to know, where is the discharge going to go? How fast is it going to go there? And how much is going? Now, for all areas and equipment at the facility with the potential for a discharge, you need to provide appropriate containment or diversionary structures to prevent a discharge. So mobile refuelers, other non-transportation related tank cars, oil-filled operational or process equipment, transfer areas, piping, those all need appropriate general secondary containment, where the containment system must be capable of containing oil, and it must be constructed so that any discharge will not escape before cleanup can occur. General secondary containment is intended to address the most likely oil discharge from any part of that facility with no sizing or freeboard requirement, and this is the minimum expectation for containment. Specific or size secondary containment will be discussed later in relation to loading and unloading racks and bulk storage containers. General secondary containment can be passive or active or a combination of the two. Passive measures are permanent installations and do not require deployment or action by the owner or operator. Examples include dikes and berms, culverting at the facility, drainage systems, retention ponds, sumps, drip pans, curbing. Whereas active containment measures are those that require deployment or other specific action by the operator. These may be deployed either before an activity involving oil handling starts or in reaction to a discharge. So examples would be bringing out a drain cover that's near a transfer area and covering up that drain before you're starting to transfer your oil, having sorbent materials or spill kits nearby, hard boom, soft boom, or closing a valve that controls drainage either before or if a discharge is occurring. Something else that we get asked quite a bit is whether a contingency plan would count as active secondary containment. Now, as I just said, active secondary containment are measures that are put in place before that oil activity starts or in reaction to a discharge before it's going to reach navigable waters or leaves the facility property. Whereas a contingency plan is a detailed oil spill response plan on how to address a discharge that has reached navigable water. So active measures are used to meet secondary containment requirements, while contingency plans are used when secondary containment is determined to be impracticable or when choosing to implement alternative measures for eligible oil-filled equipment, which I'll speak more to. Now, the impracticability determination is intended to be used when a facility owner or operator cannot install secondary containment by any reasonable method. Now, considerations for this can include space limitations, if there's a local ordinance or fire code that would not allow for it, safety or other good engineering practice reasons why you cannot have secondary containment. Economic cost can be considered, but it can't be the only factor. You can't have an impracticability determination because it's too expensive. There needs to be other factors involved. If an impracticability determination is made, it must be clearly explained in the plan and certified by the PE. The owner or operator must prepare an oil contingency plan in accordance with 40 CFR Part 109 and provide a written commitment of manpower, equipment, and materials to control and remove the discharged oil unless that facility has submitted an FRP to EPA. There are additional requirements as well if for integrity testing and leak testing if bulk storage containers are involved. Heather's going to handle bulk storage containers later on in the presentation. And this brings us now to our second polling question. How often must a facility complete a full review and evaluation of their SPCC plan? Do you need to complete a full review every 6 months, annually, every 3 years, every 5 years, or only when there is a change in operations?
Okay, thanks, Kim. And we have launched the poll. So when it shows up on your screen, please make your selections. We'll give people about 45 seconds to get their answers submitted. All right, most folks have made their selections. If you haven't already done so, we'll give it a few more seconds before we close the polls. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
All right, it looks like the majority of you were paying attention and got it right. Every 5 years, you're required to do a full review and evaluation of your plan. So moving on, hopefully you guys are all still with me because we're not even through all the requirements for subpart A. There's also requirements for record keeping where I'm going to throw out another amount of time for you. You have to have written procedures for tests and inspections, and you must keep those records for a period of 3 years. Records of inspections and tests can be kept under usual and customary business practices, but don't forget that they need to be signed by the appropriate supervisor or inspector. You have to train all oil handling personnel in the operation and maintenance of equipment to prevent discharges. You have to train them in discharge procedure protocols, applicable pollution control laws, rules, and regulations, general facility operations, and the contents of the facility SPCC plan. Makes sense. If you're handling oil, you should know these things. You also need to make sure you designate a person accountable for discharge prevention at your facility that reports to management, and you must schedule and conduct a discharge prevention briefing at least once per year. Now, these briefings are to assure adequate understanding of the SPCC plan for that facility. And such briefings should highlight and describe known discharges or failures, malfunctioning components, and any recently developed precautionary measures. You also have to take into account facility security. The plan needs to address how you control access to your oil areas, how you secure master flow and drain valves, how you're going to prevent unauthorized access to the starter controls on oil pumps, and you need to address appropriateness of security lighting at your facility. So think, how are you going to prevent acts of vandalism? And then what's being done or in place to assist in the discovery of a discharge? Those need to be included in your plan. Now, if your facility has a loading or unloading rack, then 112.7H applies to you. So what exactly is a loading unloading rack? Under the SPCC rule, it is and it has a definition that it's a fixed structure necessary for loading or unloading a tank, truck, or car. So you may ask, what's the difference between that and a transfer area? Well, a rack includes a loading or unloading arm in that definition. So look for a loading or unloading arm in this area. If you have one, it's a rack. If you don't, you have a transfer area. So if you have that loading or unloading rack at your facility, the rule requires that you either have drainage to flow into a catchment basin, or you have the drainage to use a quick drainage system for the rack. If you don't have either of those, you need containment size to hold at least the maximum capacity of any single compartment of a tank car or tank. You'll also need to make sure that the tank truck doesn't, sorry, I got quick with the button. You also need to make sure that the tank truck doesn't accidentally depart before disconnecting by providing interlock warning lights or physical barrier systems, warning signs, wheel chocks, or a vehicle brake interlock system. And then don't forget to inspect the lowermost drain and all outlets before filling and departure. Now, if you have field constructed above ground containers, you need to evaluate the container for risk of discharge or failure due to brittle fracture or other catastrophe, and as necessary, take appropriate action. You have to discuss conformance with any applicable more stringent state rules, regulations, and guidelines. Now remember, SPCC is a federal regulation. However, you do have to consider if there's more stringent state regulations that come into play, and you need to discuss those in your plan. If you have oil-filled operational equipment at your facility, like transformers in 55-gallon containers or greater of the transformer for the oil, you have an option to provide alternative measures in lieu of general secondary containment if you meet qualification requirements. And those qualifications are no single discharge of oil greater than 1,000 gallons and no two discharges of oil greater than 42 gallons within any 12-month period. If you choose the optional alternative measures instead of secondary containment for the oil-filled operational equipment, you must establish and document an inspection or monitoring program to detect equipment failure or a discharge, and prepare an oil spill contingency plan and submit that written commitment of manpower, equipment, and materials, again, unless you have an FRP. Keep in mind, for this, there is no impracticability determination required for qualified oil-filled operational equipment. Again, no impracticability determination needed, and it's an option. So now I'm going to give my lungs a little break, and I'm going to hand it over to Heather, who's going to talk about subparts B and C of the regulation.
All right, thanks, Kim. So I know we've already covered a lot today, but there's more. Subparts B and C of the rule cover requirements for facilities based on the type of facility and type of oil stored. Now, subpart B is going to include those requirements for facilities that store petroleum and non-petroleum oils, while subpart C is going to cover animal fats and vegetable oils. As I mentioned, these parts are each going to outline requirements for the specific facility type, including those requirements for facility drainage, the many requirements for bulk storage containers, and the requirements for facility transfer operations, pumping, and facility processes. Subparts B and C cover a lot, and we really wish we could cover this in more detail. But, due to our limited time, we wanted to make sure we cover some of the key provisions specific to bulk storage containers today. And those are going to be found in section 112.8 for onshore facilities, 112.9 for production facilities, and then we're going to touch on those for animal fat and vegetable oil facilities in 112.12. So first, it's important to know what is a bulk storage container. And as defined under 112.2 of the rule, a bulk storage container is any container that is used to store oil. And these are going to include those that store oil prior to use, while being used, or while waiting to be transported or distributed in commerce. It's also important to keep in mind that oil-filled electrical equipment, oil-filled operational equipment, and oil-filled manufacturing equipment are not part of this definition. They are not considered bulk storage containers and do not apply to the bulk storage container requirements of the rule. One of the key requirements for bulk storage containers at SPCC facilities, and it's a fun one, is integrity testing. This requirement applies to the larger field-erected tanks, smaller shop-built tanks, any partially buried or bunkered tanks, as well as any container at the facility that stores oil, even the mobile or portable containers and drums. The owner or operator is required to test or inspect each above-ground container for integrity on a regular schedule, as well as when material repairs are made to that container. Rather than requiring a certain type of testing or inspection to be performed, the rule does give the flexibility to the facility and the ability to use industry standards to determine both who will be conducting these tests and inspections and the type of inspection, as well as the frequency they are conducted and the industry standard used. So this is going to be relative to the container size, configuration, and design. Some common industry standards used include API 653 for field-erected tanks and STI SP001 for shop-built tanks. It's important to note that for animal fat and vegetable oil bulk containers, those covered under 112.12, certain containers are not subject to the integrity testing requirements. If the animal fat or vegetable oil container is subject to the Food and Drug Administration requirements under 21 CFR Part 110, they are also elevated, constructed specifically of austenitic stainless steel, do not have external insulation, and are shop built, so meets all those requirements, then the facility could instead conduct formal visual inspections of these tanks on a regular schedule, as well as frequently inspect the outside of the containers for any deterioration, discharges, and any accumulation of oil inside diked areas. It's important to know that the facility does still need to determine and document in the plan the appropriate qualifications for these individuals conducting the visual inspections. That's just important to note. Another key component to subparts B and C, and it's an important one, is size secondary containment. Kim spoke briefly about general secondary containment and specific or size secondary containment as it applies to loading and unloading racks, but we're going to go over how it applies specifically for bulk storage containers. Now, size secondary containment for bulk storage containers must be designed to hold the capacity of the largest tank within the containment area. It also needs to account for any precipitation that's expected to take up space in the containment, also called freeboard. And EPA doesn't specifically specify what the requirement is for freeboard, but generally either 110% of the capacity of the largest tank in that containment area is used, or the maximum level of precipitation after reviewing a 24-hour, 25-year storm event. Secondary containment must also be sufficiently impervious to contain discharged oil, and the PE and owner-operator have the flexibility to best determine how to meet this. Some examples of size secondary containment would include dikes, containment curbs, and pits, Facilities may also use alternative systems that include features such as a catchment basin that will stop a discharge and safely confine it within the facility. And it's also important to note that when you're calculating the size secondary containment for the bulk storage area, you also need to consider displacement by any other objects or equipment or containers that take up space within the containment structure. For production facilities, we just wanted to touch on one little thing that was important to note. It's important to note that size secondary containment applies to bulk storage containers at these production facilities under 112.9 as well. But for certain production equipment, such as produced water containers, alternative measures may be used instead. And that brings us to our last live polling question, number 3. And that's going to take into account a little bit of what Kim covered and a little bit of what I just covered. So which of the following requires general secondary containment and not sized or specific secondary containment? Is it loading or unloading racks, transfer areas, bulk storage containers, mobile or portable storage containers, or stock oil tanks at an oil production battery? We'll give you guys some time to submit your answers.
Okay, the polls have been launched. So when this becomes available on your screen, go ahead and make your selections, and we'll give folks another 30 seconds to make their selections. Okay, the majority of folks have submitted their votes. We will give it a few more seconds since we still have a few more votes coming in. Okay, it looks like most folks were able to vote. I'm going to go ahead and close and share the results.
All right. So it looks like most of you guys got this correct. The correct answer for what requires general secondary containment is transfer areas. So good job, guys. So to close things out, I am going to turn it back over to Kim, and she's going to talk about regional contacts and guidance specific to SPCC.
All right, don't fret if you're feeling overwhelmed. We are here to help. You can contact us with questions anytime. Again, I'm the SPCC coordinator for Region 5. Happy to help. I'm located in our Ann Arbor office, so I'm in the same time zone as you in Ohio. Heather is our SPCC inspector out of Chicago, so she's an hour behind. So if you're a late worker, it's late in the day and you have a question, you might have better luck reaching her. If you have questions specific to facility response plans, we have an FRP coordinator for the region. That's Alex Tazales. He is in our Chicago office. We also have a lot of great information on our website, epa.gov/oil spill. There's a lot of fact sheets and guidance out on the website to assist with understanding and implementing the rule. A selection of these fact sheets and links have been compiled as part of the handouts for this session as well, so make sure you save those. Now, I want to take what little time we have left to highlight EPA's SPCC guidance for regional inspectors that's available on our website. You can download it as a PDF. The document's designed to assist in implementing rule requirements, understand applicability, and also clarify what EPA's role is when we're reviewing a facility's implementation of the performance-based provisions of the rule. The document's divided into 7 chapters and includes several appendices. In Chapter 1, you're going to find detailed information on the purpose and scope of the rule. Chapter 2 provides an in-depth discussion of applicability criteria and relevant scenarios. If you want to know whether something's an oil, check out this chapter because there's whole sections dedicated just to what is an oil. Chapter 3 addresses the environmental equivalence provisions and the requirements eligible for those. Chapter 4 of the document covers secondary containment, both general and sized. It describes the requirements and demonstrates how they apply to specific equipment and activities. So if you've got a transformer, oil-filled electrical equipment, manufacturing equipment, check out the secondary containment chapter to see how those would apply. If you have an oil-water separator at your facility, you'll want to pay close attention to Chapter 5 to see how the rule applies to various scenarios involving those OWSs. Chapter 6 covers the necessary level of detail for your facility description and facility diagram. And finally, Chapter 7 provides an overview of inspection, evaluation, and testing requirements. So that integrity testing stuff, Chapter 7. In addition to those 7 chapters, the document includes several appendices with lots of great additional information. You'll find copies of the regulations in Appendix A and B, including the Clean Water Act, Section 311J, and 40 CFR Part 112, SPCC, 40 CFR Part 110, that Sheen rule as we call it, and 40 CFR Part 109 for contingency plans. Appendix C covers revisions to the rule, as we've had several amendments to the rule over the years. So it includes the revisions in 2002, 2006, 2008, 2009, and 2011. Now, there's a reason why this guidance document is over 900 pages. That's because we include sample SPCC plans for a bulk storage facility and a production facility. So if you're starting from scratch and have no idea what an SPCC plan might look like, you can reference these samples in Appendix D and E. We even include a sample contingency plan in Appendix F. You'll notice Appendix G here is highlighted and in larger text, and this is because I personally think it includes the most important document a facility can use to help determine whether they're addressing all applicable requirements in their plan and implementing them properly. This appendix has the checklist that EPA would use when conducting an inspection. The checklist is designed to assist in evaluating whether a facility's SPCC plan adequately addresses all applicable requirements and whether the facility is adequately implementing those requirements. I highly recommend you review your plan and implementation against the checklist to ensure you're including and following all applicable provisions. Finally, Appendix H includes numerous policy documents of benefit, such as EPA memos on the use of alternative secondary containment measures. There's an EPA liner study in there, the infamous Safety Clean letter that addresses scenarios for when a railroad car goes from transportation related to non-transportation related, which I think we had a question submitted about that, so you're going to want to read that memo. And then we also have documents related to EPA jurisdiction at complexes. We include FRP rule attachments, and we even have worksheets for calculating secondary containment volumes. One last piece of advice I want to get out about the guidance document: control plus find and keyword search is going to be your best friend, because again, this is a 900+ page document. So that concludes our jam-packed overview of SPCC. Again, here's contact information for myself and Heather. Thank you so much for your time, attention, and interest in SPCC. And I guess now let's see if we have time for questions that were submitted.
Thank you, Kim and Heather. We're now going to begin answering questions submitted during today's presentation. We do have Mark Howard from US EPA headquarters. He's been behind the scenes checking out the questions that have been coming in, and he's going to be helping address the questions. As a reminder, you can still submit questions with the questions pane in your control panel, and we'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. But if we don't answer your question during this portion, we will reach out to you via email following today's webinar. Mark, when you're ready, feel free to read the questions out loud and send either Heather or Kim for a response.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yep. Perfect.
Great. Well, I want to congratulate Kim and Heather. They're putting me out of a job, so I'll be stuck in DC forever now. But nice job. We got a lot of great questions. I wanted to first kind of start at a 50,000-foot level, because there's some things that have come in that all kind of get to the same point, and I don't think we can drill into all the details of those. Number one is, just a little bit about there's a lot of questions that talk about the Ohio EPA and what they allow or don't allow. The Ohio EPA is kind enough to give us a platform to present, but this is a DI program. That means direct implementation. So Ohio doesn't implement the program. The federal government does through EPA. So there is no, for those of you that are familiar with the USG program, we don't delegate it to the states. It's strictly run by EPA. The second is on what's in oil. There's a lot of questions about oil determinations. EPA, as a routine matter, does not make oil determinations for facilities. I've sent out our guidance document, and you can, as Kim had said, check out Chapter 12, particularly subsection 2.2, and it talks about some of the tools that you can use to make these oil determinations, including the Coast Guard's list. Now, that being said, the Coast Guard's list is guidance. The lack of the presence of a material on that list doesn't necessarily equate to it not being an oil. But another friend would be using SDS sheets for your determinations and looking for petroleum, synthetic, or animal fat and vegetable oil mixtures in the component. And if that's the case, you're typically going to end up having an oil. So those being said, let's get to the first question, and it is from Christy. It says, if your company does not have a PE that can the responsible officials sign the SPCC, or must a consultant be hired for the PE signature? Are there any other options? Kim, Heather?
So the only other option would be if you're a qualified facility where you have 10,000 gallons or less total storage capacity, and you have that clean spill history, you have the option to self-certify the plan and not have PE certification. If you do not meet the eligibility requirements for qualified facilities, you do need to have a PE review and certify the plan.
Great. The next question, given the considerations, it seems like the number of facilities that would not have a reasonable expectation to discharge is limited. Is it rare that EPA finds a facility that does not have reasonable potential, it should be reasonable expectation, and therefore does not need to follow the SPCC rule? I'm modifying the question a little bit. Kim, Heather?
Yep. So when you're looking at that reasonable expectation for discharge, you could have a facility that is, for lack of a better term, completely landlocked. There is no pathways to navigable water nearby. In those instances, if there is not a reasonable expectation that a discharge from the facility could reach navigable water through overland flow, sewer systems, connecting waterways, precipitation, then they would not be subject.
Great. And wanted to also highlight a point that Kim had made earlier. When you're making that reasonable expectation determination, you cannot consider man-made structures. And I think that was in one of the polls or one of her discussions. So next, if all of a facility's drainage leads to a privately owned quarry pond on site, and therefore any oil discharges would ultimately go to the pond, would there be a reasonable expectation of discharge? Kim? You don't hear me?
So, yeah, I'm just rereading the question, making sure I fully understand. So essentially, this quarry pond would be considered a retention pond at the facility. If there's no possible way for oil to escape from there, there's no connecting water, there's no potential for flooding where the oil that is in that retention pond could escape. Again, you're looking at what is a reasonable expectation. So you have to take into account topography, precipitation runoff, overland flow. So I don't want to give a yes or no answer to that without knowing some more site-specific information about that scenario.
And I would further dissect it. I think Kim's spot on. The thing that jumps out to me is privately owned. If you're relying on an off-site facility for your containment, that's probably not going to fit within the requirements of the SPCC rule, because your facility is supposed to be designed to have these measures. You're not supposed to be relying on an off-site facility. So I mean, I'm getting into legalese here, but the definition of facility would probably, unless that private pond was part of your facility, I don't know that you could call that a containment structure. Now, that being said, making a reasonable expectation, it potentially could be a factor. But the issue is it's a quarry, so it's man-made. So anyways, go ahead. Kim, second, the next one is, we got 3 of those in the same one. Let's see. Did we lose audio? Okay, we have a handful of sites that trigger SPCC because of a large transformer, 6,000 to 8,000 gallons. Can we use the Tier 1 template, 1? And 2, is it oil field operational equipment less than 5,000 gallons, but not an AST greater than 5,000? So I think they're asking about the criterion for Tier 1 and how they can use it.
Okay, there's kind of some follow-up questions for that. You know, you're saying handful of sites, so this is going to get into the definition of facility and how you're defining your facility boundaries. If the facility boundary is just one single transformer that's 6,000 to 8,000 gallons, but I'll add into this that, you know, you can't define your facility boundaries just to get out of SPCC. So again, get back into the guidance document in Chapter 2 that talks about this and gives examples in different scenarios. But if we say that, you know, one transformer consists of a facility and you have no other oil storage containers that are 55 gallons or greater, you just have that single 8,000 gallon transformer, that's not going to be able to use the Tier 1 template because it's greater than 5,000 gallons.
Okay, next, if we have a full plan with PE certification but meet the requirements of Tier 1, do we need to notify OEPA of the change? And actually, I think to modify the question, do we have to notify EPA of the change?
Okay. Sorry, again, trying to make sure I'm following the questions correctly. Before I go to that one, I want to go back to the previous question about the transformer. The Tier 1 template stuff, it's not about bulk storage containers, so it doesn't matter that it's oil field operational. It's any container that's greater than 5,000 gallons. So continuing on now to the question.
Let me clarify that, though.
Mark.
Yeah, it's any above ground storage container. It's kind of an odd thing that we did there, but Kim's right. It doesn't differentiate between oil field and bulk, but it does have a modifier specific to above ground. So you could have 1 billion gallons underground and it doesn't impact your determination. So that's only an above ground storage container determination. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that as well. Okay, so back to the question about you've got a full plan with PE certification, but now you're a Tier 1. No, there's no requirement to notify of the change. And again, like Mark mentioned, it's not an Ohio EPA thing. It is a federal U.S. EPA requirement. But no, you do not have to notify us. Unless we're specifically requesting submittals or you have a spill where you're required to do a notification to EPA, there does not need to be a notification.
Great.
Sorry,
now here is a interesting one. There are a number of small businesses in rural Portage County, Ohio, that offer oil spray, in quotes, for rust proofing of the undercarriage of motor vehicles, which may carry the dripping oil off site where it enters into roadside ditches and then the navigable waters. Are these oil spray businesses regulated?
Mark, I'm going to defer to you for that question.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. If the way the rule operates is if there is it appears to be a mobile, I go in and do something and leave, the SPCC rule wouldn't necessarily apply. But if the reverse occurred, let's say that this business set up and had a truck or vehicle that was at a facility that was in a more fixed operating mode, they exceeded the thresholds, yes, they'd have an SPCC plan. But I think where this is going when it says, quote unquote, regulated, all that's moot relative to the liability for an oil spill. So outside statutory, for properly operating vehicles, any discharge of oil from a facility is reportable, and there's a liability for that discharge. So that's a difficult question to answer because it looks like there's mobile parts moving around and dripping oil and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is an owner-operator facility that has an oil that causes a discharge that's harmful under 110 is liable for the spill and for reporting. Okay, so let's move on. That's a kind of a really great question. Okay, this is a great one too. Slide 29, who decides or determines whether the more effective prevention and control technology is available? So this would be in relation to the 5-year review, Kim.
Yep, so as a part of that 5-year review, the facility owner, operator, and the certifying PE are going to make that determination on whether there's more effective prevention and control technology available and feasible for the facility to implement.
And I just add that while the 5-year review does not specifically require a PE review, it's always a good idea, but it is not required. But examples where I have seen this triggered, what I tell people is that 5-year review is for the owner-operator to look to see if they missed any technical amendments, number one. Number two would be, and more often than not where I see this come into play, is if you have a tank where you have changed the standard to which you're inspecting the container to a more recent version, would be a good example where you'd want to update that, and that would have to be PE certified. So that's how to handle that. Okay, we're getting towards the end here. Oh, this is good. Do we need to have a determination of why or why not you need an SPCC plan on file at your facility?
So I would say, there's no determination of why you need the plan. I would say if you are a facility that thinks you are not subject, I would recommend that you do have that determination of why you think you aren't subject in case EPA comes knocking to say about doing an inspection at your facility and you say, well, I'm not subject to the rule. But Mark, do you want to talk about any kind of formal determination?
No, I think your guidance is well taken. I think the bottom line is if you're going to make an argument that you're out, and more typically than not now, we're seeing it with jurisdictional arguments about waters of the U.S. or reasonable expectation, or the way you define your facility. I would document that, because the reason being is if you did have a spill, it demonstrates to the enforcement office that we are that you have done your due diligence. So I think that's the best way to handle it. Okay, so I got diverted because I'm running late for something else. But let me get to the last couple of questions here. Let's see. We had loading and unloading area. For a loading and unloading rack. For a loading and unloading rack, what is considered acceptable containment basin? Does it have to be lined, or can it be a sand and gravel pad?
So you're kind of mixing a little bit here. It seems like catchment basin versus perhaps secondary containment. If you have a sand and gravel pad, that kind of sounds like you've got the ability for material to discharge out of that and not be sufficiently impervious. So your catchment basin, your secondary containment, it has to be sufficiently impervious to keep that discharge in place until it can be cleaned up.
Okay, what is the most common method of general containment you see being used for electrical transformers?
So general secondary containment, again, those are the, there's no sized component to it, no freeboard, no sufficiently impervious, oh no, there is sufficiently impervious for it, sorry. For general, so these can be active or passive measures. So a lot of times you're going to look at where your, sorry, I'm losing the question. So electric transformers, where those are, if they're inside diked areas, that's kind of commonly where we're seeing at larger facilities where those electric transformers are. You know, they could be in parking lots or throughout the facility that are already surrounded by passive installations.
Great. Okay, the next question is, I'm going to multitask here and doing a bad job of it. Okay, let's see. So, what's coming from? The next one I answered, and I'll just real quick so we can move on. Are electrical transformers considered bulk storage containers? And that answer is no. So we'll move on. This is the one that Kim referred to earlier. This is kind of a complicated one, but as she mentioned, first you have to look at the safety clean letter. But the question is, if I have a customer rail car full of oil come on site and we use our equipment to transfer the oil to a different customer overland, over the road tanker truck, are either the rail car tank or tanker truck considered bulk storage? Does it matter if they're on site for a certain amount of time?
Okay, that's a lot to read through. So I'm going to try to generalize here and hope that I answer your question here. When you're looking at rail cars or tanker trucks that are coming onto a non-transportation related facility property that's subject to SPCC, the question is, when does it go from DOT transportation related to non-transportation related? So for things like rail cars, you're going to be looking at, is it considered still in transit or has, the transportation ceased? So if it's there just for the loading, unloading operations, standard amount of time that it's sitting and not sitting for a longer duration, then it's still going to be under that DOT regulation except for the transfer operations. Now, if you're taking that rail car, you're no longer in commerce. It's no longer, the manifest has ended and you're starting to just hold it on your facility property. It could turn into a bulk storage container that's subject to the regulations. An example for tanker truck cars, though, say you have a full tanker truck, you're going out for deliveries, but you're unable to make your deliveries to empty out the tank. So the truck is returning to the facility with some material in it overnight. It's now going to be subject to SPCC because it's storing overnight at the facility property.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these questions are based also on whether the facility is otherwise regulated. So if the facility is otherwise regulated, that also adds a different spin to this. And we don't have time to go into all the different permutations of this, but I think Kim hit it on the head. The bottom line is, what is the intended use of the container and has it reached its destination? And if that rail car has reached its destination, it's no longer in transportation, it's transferring products in lieu of a bulk storage tank. So let's move on. Let's see, we had a question about oil mixtures. In short, any mixture of oil and any other anything else is an oil. So got that, answered that directly. What is the status of the consent order on the US EPA to create rules on chemicals similar to the SPCC rule? I will handle that one, Kim, if you don't mind. The agency took action, I believe it was last year. So if you go to our website on essentially the SPCC rule for chemicals, the agency's decision was there was existing web of regulatory requirements that were suitable such that we did not propose any additional requirements. But again, I will dig up the website and try to paste it in here for you before we leave. The next one, groundwater is the state. I would refer you to our and I think this is really getting to EPA. But for the purposes of the EPA and groundwater, I'd ask that you go to our website on our new navigable or WOTUS rule. If you just put in WOTUS on Google, you'll get to it. One over this thing, what's the oil? What should be done if secondary containment is too small for a fuel tank? And that's our last question.
I'm not sure I'm following the question. So if the secondary containment is too small, if you're talking about requirements for size secondary containment and the containment is not sized appropriately, you would need to make sure you're getting appropriate size secondary containment.
Yeah, it may be that. I think what the question is getting at, because it is a little fuzzy, but if you have determined that you've done the measurements and you've determined that your containment structure is not sufficient for your tank, and we have some on our webpage with the guidance document, some general calculations that you can use to kind of determine that. You're going to have to either expand your containment or provide what we call remote impounding from your containment to another area to provide a sufficient sizing, which is for a bulk container, the size of the largest container plus freeboard for rain event. Now, in the case of a single container, you don't have to worry about displacement. But if there are more than one containers in the containment area, then you have to worry about the displacement. And I think that wraps it up for our webinar. So I want to thank everybody. I'm going to pass it over to the moderators. And unfortunately, DC is spinning out of control, so I've got to jump off. And thank you all for your questions. And folks in Region 5, I really appreciate your efforts here. And of course, Ohio for hosting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Heather, for your excellent presentation. Thank you, Mark, for facilitating the Q&A portion. And thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive the survey. We value your feedback, and we would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we're doing and let us know if there's anything we can do to further assist you. The certificate of attendance will also be included via email about a day or so after the session. This session includes our 3-week-long virtual compliance assistance conference. Unable to attend prior conference sessions, no worries, as each has been recorded and the recordings are available, or at least will be available soon, on our GoToStage and our conference landing page. If you have questions regarding CEUs, attendance certificates, or would like to follow up with one or more of our presenters, please don't hesitate to email us at the address on the slide. And with that, we will end today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.